The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors.
With so many people living longer, the fear of outliving your money becomes a reality for many of us. Will I be a financial burden? Will I outlive my money? How will I be remembered? My name is Neil Himmelstein, president of Main Street Planning Group. Please contact me by visiting mainstreetplanninggroup.com. That's mainstreetplanninggroup.com, or call 631-647-4694. I will introduce you to strategies that will guarantee you will not outlive your money, that can guarantee you will not be a burden on your loved ones. Through a collaborative approach, we will uncover solutions that offer tax-efficient strategies, lifetime income, and legacy planning, choice, organization, direction, and education. That is the code we stand behind. Contact mainstreetplanninggroup.com, that's mainstreetplanninggroup.com, or call 631-647-4694. And listen to me every Friday at 3 p.m. as I host the Main Street Code for Financial Success, right here on 103.9 LI News Radio. Good afternoon and Happy New Year! This is the Main Street Code for Financial Success, and I'm your host, Neil Himmelstein. And when we talk about code, we talk about choice, organization, direction, and education. And we work with hundreds of accountants, attorneys, and financial advisors across the country, as well as many different clients regarding their insurance needs. And today, we are very fortunate to have with us Mr. Lawrence Scherer, who's an estate planning and business succession attorney and a recovering CPA. Say hello, Larry.
Good afternoon, everybody. And before I forget, Happy New Year.
Thank you. And I wanted to have Larry with us today, and we'll give you a chance to connect with Larry. Today, I wanted to specifically talk, here on Long Island, our number one economic engine, and actually around the world, that people don't talk enough about is agriculture. And here on Long Island, we have a ton of family farms, not just farms that do traditional farming, but wineries or farms. We have aquaculture here that is growing tremendously. If you have a young person, they want to know what to do. They're rebirthing oysters and having kelp farms and all kinds of great things, not just on the land, but in the water. And all that is very important to us. And Larry, my big concern is I've been, talking with a lot of family farms, and one of the biggest areas of concern is in business succession planning, which I know you're an expert in. And the farms, in particular here on Long Island, the value of the land is so humongous, because the value of the, people don't realize, even if you have a working farm and you're only making a nominal amount of money, the value of the land is your legacy, and that legacy can be taxed extremely heavily in leaving it to your heirs. Can you talk a little bit about that, Larry?
Absolutely. The IRS really doesn't care what you're doing with your property. They're looking for the highest and best use of the property, meaning the most amount of money they can get from estate taxes. In the fact that you have something that for you has a value intrinsic to its use, you may have it valued as a farm, and the IRS may say, nope, its highest and best use would be putting up a condo complex. So there is an election that is allowed for real property, and farms qualify. If you're using it as a farm for 5 of the last 8 years, you can elect to have an alternate valuation. In other words, value the farm as a farm.
Right. And what does that do, though? I mean, so, the estate tax, without getting, a lot of people think, oh, I don't really have an estate tax. But, here we have a situation, like I had a family I was working with, and they had 3 children. Actually, the one I was working with had 5 children. And, the spouse had passed away, and they were going to leave this to the 5 children, this farm. And I think there was 50 acres, which is quite sizable. And the best use of 50 acres on Long Island in Suffolk County could be $500,000 an acre easily, right?
Easy.
So at $500,000 or $1 million an acre, you're talking $25 million to the IRS which would generate a huge tax, correct?
Absolutely.
Right. So if you wanted to leave that to your children to work that farm, you have to pay a big tax.
Yep.
And where's that money going to come from?
Well, first you have to figure out how much money is it going to be, and theoretically, once you get past the exclusion and or the threshold that New York has, you would have a 40% federal estate tax and a 20% New York estate tax. That 20% tax can be taken as a deduction on your federal return, but you're still looking at an effective rate of 50% or more. And the truth is, unless you have liquid assets, you're going to have a problem paying that tax, which must be paid within 9 months.
Wow, within 9 months. So you want to leave this farm to your 3 children or your 5 children, and you have a working farm, and all of a sudden something happens to you, you pass away, and you want your children to have this farm, and then there's a tax of $10 million.
Yep.
Where's that come from? So one of the things you can do is you can buy an insurance policy which will give you cash to pay that tax if you wanted to keep the farm. Now that's one problem. Now here's the other problem. One of the kids went to college and is studying to be an attorney. Another kid went to college and studying to be a doctor. And the other kid is still working on the farm. And they want to keep that farm. Well, how does that work? I mean, the parent wants to treat their 3 kids equally, but how do you pass on this land without having cash?
That is a problem. You can basically set the farm up where it's held in an LLC. The LLC can be given in distributive shares, but the person whose sweat of the brow work tends to be more of a participant in this and more likely to want a larger share of income. In other words, they're going to earn their income from the production that the farm has, whether it is livestock, whether it is food, or other farming business.
Nursery, tomatoes. I mean,
again, we got to come up with liquid assets as the other choice.
Right.
There again is the insurance as an option.
Right. Now, the other thing that we find a lot of, which is detrimental to our long-standing environment and everything else, is you find a lot of families, they say, well, let me just sell the farm. So let's say, we bought property and we paid, $800 an acre, and now it's worth $500,000 an acre, $1 million an acre. And over time, a lot of the old farms had bought property very inexpensive. Property was very inexpensive back in the day. And now the land is worth so much money. How do we sell this? I mean, we're going to sell it and have a huge tax liability when we sell. Is there ways of avoiding that? What is that tax liability?
Okay, first off, the tax liability could be as much as 33%, a little bit more if you happen to have a resident in New York City. New York State taxes capital gains as ordinary income, which brings you about 9% rate. You have a 20% federal rate. And on top of that, thanks to the Obama tax plan, there's a 3.8% additional capital gains for medical devices. So ultimately, you end up with close to a 33% tax.
Wow.
On the capital gains. That's the amount above what you've invested in the property called your basis.
Right. So there are ways that you could minimize that tax or avoid that tax, correct?
Well, there is a technique called, because it's real estate, called the 1031 exchange.
Right.
It's one of the ways that you can get a great benefit, and that benefit is you swap the property for an income-producing property, and then you hold it until you die. Again, that's just deferring the tax on that. And if you buy and use a 1031 exchange, you don't recognize gain now.
Right.
You get the benefit of the additional income earned by your replacement property, which can be as many as 3 properties. But ultimately, the tax is going to come due at some point, whether it's an estate tax or capital gains.
Well, there's also land trusts and charitable trusts, and I want to go a little bit more into it. I know it's a little technical for most people, but people need to know their options. And I just want to go into that a little bit more after the break. We're going to break in about 30 seconds, and you're listening to the Main Street Code for Financial Success. If you want to get a hold of me, I'm at 631-647-4694. We can answer all your questions. And Larry, can you give your information out, please?
Absolutely. I work in a firm called Scherer and Pudell in Garden City. Our telephone number is 516-747-7007.
And if you can't listen to this whole broadcast, we will be putting it on Spotify and Apple podcast for you. The Main Street Code for Financial Success, Neil Himmelstein. You can reach me by emailing me at themainstreetcode.com or 631-647-4694. We'll be right back. Thank you. Welcome back to the Main Street Code for Financial Success. Again, I'm your host, Neil Himmelstein. You can always reach me at 631-647-4694. We're here to help you with all your insurance and planning needs, and we can help get you the right attorney, accountant, or whatever your issue is. And today we're focusing on the family farm because the family farm is a business that needs a lot of planning. Because the value of the land is so great, there's a lot of planning involved, whether you're selling your farm, whether you're going to leave it to your children. But you must make a plan, not just if you pass away, but if you live and you want your kids to have the benefit of the farm, or something happens to you, if you become sick or ill and can't work the farm. You know, how's that going to work? There are insurances there for disability, not just your regular liability insurances, but there's a lot of things to think about, and you really need to speak to experts like myself and like my guest, Larry Scherer, Lawrence Scherer of Scherer and Pudell. Say hello, Larry.
Hello.
Please, thank you. And before the break, we were talking about, okay, this has been in my family for 100 years. I don't see us working the farm anymore. I'm going to sell my property. Okay, now, to sell your property, there's a couple things. If you're selling it to a developer, the developer knows it's going to take 5 or 6 years to develop that property and change the zoning and do all this. Didn't you tell me that before? Yeah. So sometimes you're not going to get the ultimate best value when you go to sell because developers know that it's going to take time to develop and sell, and they're going to have to hold on to the property and pay taxes and everything else. And they may get zone change, they may not. So you may not get the best price. However, if you pass away with the property, the IRS is going to value it at the best value as if you were to sell it today. So it's one of the things you need to consider. The other thing you need to consider if you're going to sell, and we were talking about this before the break, is it's a huge capital gains tax if you bought land for the cheap and now you're going to sell it, that the government is going to take between the federal and the state. Larry was saying about 33%. So that's a big chunk, especially if you're looking to sell and retire on that money and give that money to your parent, to your siblings or to your children as your legacy. So there are other ways of selling your property. Larry had suggested before the break a 1031 exchange, which is a unique way of putting your property and selling it and exchanging it for other income producing property, and or it could be an investment fund that invests in property and derives an income. A very interesting planning tool that a lot of people use. But ultimately, there will be taxes to be paid. Unless, what if I gave it to a charity? What happens then?
Okay, if you give it to a charity, you can put it into a charitable trust. And in the event that you do put it into a charitable trust, it's going to be held in some sort of an entity like an LLC or something similar. At that point, you're going to be giving the income to a charity, or you're going to be retaining the income. When it is called a charitable lead, I'm giving the income to a charity, or a charitable remainder trust, which means that I take a certain annuitized payment every single year out of the value of the property and leave the remainder to a charity. Now, of course, leaving the remainder to a charity may not be the ultimate goal for family succession. So you have these different options, but given enough time, the estate tax can be mitigated, if not completely thwarted.
Right. And one of the things that we do with what we call a charitable remainder trust, as Larry just mentioned, is with that income you can have for your retirement, with a portion of that income, you can replace that asset with a life insurance policy inside a life insurance trust, which is completely estate tax-free, and that can go to your and income tax-free, and that could easily be divided with your 3 children or 5 children. Using a charitable remainder trust is a very, very unique tool, not often utilized of late, and the income you get is tax favored because ultimately the charity is going to sell the property in a 0% tax bracket because it's a charity. They'll get a remainder interest, but you're going to get that income on a very positive income, tax-favored income, and with part of that income, you can replace that entire asset, estate and income tax-free. What a tax move. A huge tax move and a huge, huge way of transferring wealth to the next generation who may or may not want to work on a farm. But there's also a lot of use on Long Island with land trusts. And I don't know a lot about land trusts. I know they're similar, but tell me a little bit about land trusts, how they work.
Well, you can take your property and drop it into a trust that will benefit family members, and you can skip generations, meaning it's not going to be included in my estate any longer because I'm going to put it into it and use my my lifetime exclusions, and then skip the next generation so it drops down to the children. And under New York law, you can go a good 90 years in a charity trust, figuring that in a family trust, that every 10 to 15 years, the values can double. So without having to subject the asset to estate taxes over and over again, you can pass it down.
Wow.
It's one of the things that you can do.
Huge. I mean, just some huge, huge, huge planning tools. And, as personally, I want to preserve the open land as much as we can. I think our environment depends on it. Our food depends on it. You may want to put it in some sort of trust that can only be used as a farm. And you can put a lot of restrictions on it so that your passion and what you've grown up in developing that farm stays a farm. And I think for a lot of people, that's extremely important. People want to know about their legacy, and that farm and that land is many of our legacy, and as a whole, as a Long Islander, is our legacy for the future. I mean, if all this land, and I know you represent a lot of real estate developers as well, Larry, but if all this land goes to condominiums, we're not going to enjoy the benefits that we have of Long Island, of fresh fruit and fresh vegetables and fresh shrubbery and fresh everything.
Prices will go up.
And prices will go up, and supply will go down. And many of you don't realize this living in New York, but there's a market called Hunts Point Market. And Hunts Point Market is the largest seller of fresh produce in the world. It's only on 135 acres. It's located around Westchester, Hunts Point Market. If you've ever been there, the largest producer in the world. And when COVID hit, they were on the phone with the President of the United States and everything else because the supply that they have, do you know how much fresh produce supply we actually have? I was told this by a farmer, which just blew my mind. How much fresh food supply do we actually have? Like 2 days. So you think about it. If trucks are halted, if the food supply is halted, if we have dramatic climate change, which we have, what happens to our food supply? Not just the prices, but the quality. I mean, listen, I guess we could survive on plastic food forever and processed food, but fresh food is really what keeps us alive and keeps us thriving. And right here on Long Island, we have the most protected, delicious, fresh produce and everything grown locally. And I love shopping locally because, everything's here to be natural and to be free. It's something you need to think about. So, we're running out of time, and I very much appreciate you listening. I wish everybody a happy and prosperous new year. And listen, now is the time to plan for your future. And you're listening to the Main Street Code for Financial Success. I hope you continue to listen next year. And if you want to hear us again, we're here every Friday at 3. I can be reached at 631-647-4694. And my friend Larry Scherer of Scherer & Padell can be reached at 516-747-7007. He's located in Garden City. And Larry, thank you for being on the show today. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're most welcome, and have a happy new year.
Thank you. Have a great day.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors.